I did. All right. Very good. All right. We're going to get started here, and we're going to pick up where we left off on the study of leadership, and we're dealing with Nehemiah. And so we really began to look at chapter 2 of Nehemiah. And so if you want to turn there, you can. And so we're looking at dynamics of interpersonal relationships, all right? And, you know, some people's styles of leadership work and some don't. And often we find ourselves in this position of like what we can call middle management, which is pretty common, where you have people above you and you have people below you, and you have to communicate between the two. And that can be kind of challenging. And so we talked about some of those principles. And what we want to do is kind of finish up this area of middle management, and we talked about that. But I want to get into something that I wanted to get to last time, but we didn't. And that is when you're dealing with situations here in Nehemiah chapter 2, in the first 9 verses we were looking at, what we want to do is consider the benefit of good questions. Okay, the benefit of good questions. Good questions help clarify situations, and they also will minimize doubt and suspicion. So Nehemiah, we find through this passage, uses good questions to his advantage. So his question to the king not only provided a rationale for his sadness. So let's just kind of refresh our memory. Let's do a little reading here. Nehemiah 2, verse 1. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up wine and gave it unto the king. Now, I had not been before time sad in his presence, wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. And I said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Now, verse 3 is a statement, let the king live forever. What does that do? Shows allegiance. But then, the rest of the verse is a question. All right, so he answers the question, why are you sad? He answers the question with a question. Don't we see Jesus doing that a lot in the Bible? I mean, you start reading the life of Jesus, and you're going to find a lot of times he's asked a question, and he answers the question with a question. And so this question to the king not only provides a rationale for his sad appearance, he basically says, why shouldn't I be sad? My father's sepulchres are disgraced. All right? This also caused his superior to reflect on his condition, the condition of those who are part of his realm. Now remember, he's talking about an area that is under the king's jurisdiction that lies wasted, lies it's been not taken care of properly. And so this also, the question, informs him of the plight of the Jews. So Nehemiah was then able to follow up this advantage without alienating his employer, which led to the answer of his prayers. So he didn't specify, he gave a lot of specifics in the form of a question. A moment ago I said Jesus used questions throughout his ministry, and he used questions at the beginning of a conversation. Let me get some readers here. Who'd like to read for me? Aaron, if you could go to John 5, verse 6. Give me 2 more readers. Don, Matthew 18, verse 12. And one more. Rosemary, Luke 10, verse 36. And the rest of us, give me one more. Give me one more. Jacob, Luke 22, verse 48. And then the rest of us can turn to a passage in Matthew 12, all right? So keep your finger here in Nehemiah, but go to Matthew 12, and I'll do a little reading there in a moment. It's a lengthier passage, or a smaller passage, I should say. So Jesus used questions at the beginning of a conversation. John 5, verse 6. Go ahead and read that.
When Jesus saw him alive, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole?
All right, so he starts off the conversation with what? A question. Will thou be made whole? Do you want to be made whole? That's how he introduced himself. Jesus reasoned with questions. Look at Matthew 12, and this is the passage I'll read, beginning in verse number 24. Matthew 12, verse 24 says this, And when the Pharisees heard it, they said, This fellow does cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of devils. And Jesus knew their thoughts, and he said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? And if I, by Beelzebub, cast out devils, by whom do your children cast them out? Therefore, they shall be your judges. But if I cast out devils by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God is coming to you. Or else, how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man? Again, question. And then he will spoil his house. He that is not with me is against me, and he that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. So we see there that he challenges them logically with a series of questions. Jesus also taught with questions. Go ahead and read Matthew 18, verse 12.
How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, both he not leave thy 99 and goeth into the mountains and seeketh that which is gone astray.
Excellent. So, again, it's a question. Who has 99 sheep, loses one, and doesn't go look for it? Considering your animal, your livestock were your wealth, all right, it'd be like this. Think of it like this. If you had $10,000 in $1,000 bands, all right, elastic band around $1,000, and you lost one in your house, you're like, well, I'm just thankful for the 9,000 I have left. Or do you go look for the 1,000? You go look. Why? It's important. All right? That's the equivalent here. All right? And so he answers the question, or he teaches, he's like, of course you go look for it. It's a question. Jesus challenged with questions after telling a crowd of people that the story of the Good Samaritan, consider what Jesus asked in Luke 10, verse 36. Go ahead and read that.
Now of these three thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves?
So he told a story. One guy helped, the other guys didn't. He says, now which of them was a neighbor? And it was the obvious answer. The Samaritan that helped him, right? Jesus asked with questions. You know, we can look at this a little further. He rebuked people with questions. Luke 22, verse 48.
But Jesus said to him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss?
You betray me with a kiss? It's a question. A fair amount of the recorded ministry of Jesus was conducted by the means of questions. He used questions to hold his listeners' attention. Why? It makes them think. It also stimulates their thought process. You know, questions can handle almost any situation. But let me just say this. It should not be for the purposes of insulting. For example, are you an idiot? That's a question. But that is for the purposes of insulting. That is not, your questions must be of an attitude of kindness. Remember David, when his brothers were insulting him, he said, "What have I done to you?" Is there not a cause? Questions. He doesn't answer the questions, but he puts it on the person to answer the question, and they come to the same logical conclusion. So we got to make sure that our questions are not used to convey our anger. Because if we ask questions in anger, we're going to put the person in a defensive position. When people are attacked, they defend themselves, okay? So if you attack somebody verbally, they're going to defend themselves, whether they're right or not. This is why over in Galatians 6, when you go to talk to somebody, you're to do so in a spirit of meekness, so as they not feel attacked. Because if they feel attacked, they'll become defensive. If you are trying to ask questions, which can be very effective means of communication, but you do so with anger, you're going to put them in a defensive position. So the questions can be very helpful when approaching a difficult situation in an objective way. The more questions you can ask people, the better you're going to be in the situation you have to deal with, because you're putting it back on them. Now, sometimes it's difficult to think of a good question at the spur of the moment. It is, all right? You're going to find that this actually takes practice, right? And sometimes it's hard to come up with a good question. And so because of the fact that sometimes it's hard to come up with a question at the moment, this is why we need to become familiar with human nature. The better we know the characteristics of the person whom we're dealing with. In other words, you got to know who you're talking to. That matters. See, why was Jesus so good at it? Well, he understood human nature perfectly. Not only did he understand human nature perfectly, but he also understood the person he was talking to perfectly. So the question that he asked was always perfect in accomplishing its intended goal. And you and I, we don't perfectly understand human nature, although we can grow in our knowledge of human nature. And, there's times where it's like, oh, I want to do this. You can do that. But human nature tells me you're going to have a problem when you do it. Like, it's going to cost you something. So you may want to think twice about that. And so you think things through logically, and you're going to, human nature will tell you how people are going to respond to a certain extent, knowing the individual you're talking to. And so if you understand who you're talking to and you understand human nature, it becomes easier to ask the right questions. Now, one of the most difficult situations to handle is a potentially hostile person. Anybody know a hothead? Man, like they fly off the handle real quick. All right? Here's the thing. You never know when your motives are going to be misunderstood. You ever been misunderstood before? You ever do something and somebody received what you did differently than you intended it? Your motives were misunderstood. So there was this one boss who constantly flew off the handle in anger, and the only person in the company that could handle him was his secretary. His secretary knew how to handle him, and she would do this by asking, quotations, what questions, and not why questions. Simple, subtle, but very effective. She would say, what is troubling you? Instead of, why are you so angry? And then she would let him talk. Does anybody understand what the difference is? That's a subtle little thing, but you have communicated extremely differently. What is troubling you? That means what has happened to you? What has been done outside of you that is affecting you negatively? Why are you so angry? You just changed it to they're the problem. Why are you angry? The focus is not the outside force that has affected them. The focus is them being the problem. It's a subtle change in language, but you will get potentially a very different response, because what is troubling you, you're not blaming them. In fact, you are in some ways empathizing with their situation, because you're at least trying to empathize, because you are acknowledging you would not be upset if it were not for a valid reason. Something has happened to you that I would probably be upset about too, but I don't know what it is. Why are you angry? You're the problem. You're not handling the situation properly. That's what you communicate. It's subtle, but very important. She would then let the guy talk, and he would calm down. It can be very challenging to handle an argumentative person. And sometimes these people appear to be very sincere. However, if we sense that our answer is going to lead to a debate, it's better to ask for clarification of the issues. In other words, sometimes as a pastor, people are baiting me. You understand what I mean? They're not interested in my answer. They're interested in conflict. So they'll go straight for controversial issues. So, what's your take on gay marriage? Why do you ask? See, they're trying to put me in a corner. Well, what I try to do is turn the table. Well, why are you asking me? Do you want, and let them answer, but in my mind is, well, do you want to learn what the Bible has to say? Or are you just looking to be argumentative? Why do you ask? Or, what's your opinion? I'm more interested in what you think. What's your opinion? They give you your opinion. Well, why are you asking me then? Sounds like you've already made up your mind. You can use questions to avoid debate. And if we find out why people feel a certain way, or why they're acting a certain way, then we can say certain things. In other words, you could steer to the real root matter, because maybe that person has a sibling that's in a gay marriage and had a Christian be extremely rude to them. And so they're just they have an axe to grind. And if you can draw that out, you can say, that's awful. I'm so sorry that happened to them. That's not Christian at all. You know, there might be disagreement on what God says about this or that, but people should never be treated that way. You use questions to get around the issue, to talk to people and get to the root matter of what people are actually getting at. And so, the more skillful we become with the use of questions, the more likelihood that our questions will accomplish our purposes. This is exactly what happened with Nehemiah. What was his goal? To be able to go do the thing that the king had already banned. Not an easy task. So how does he do it? He does it with questions. And we've already set the background. He was prepared in prayer and knew what he was going to ask for when given the opportunity. But the better we come, better skilled we are with questions, the more likelihood that it's going to accomplish our purpose. And sometimes they stimulate thought. Other times they tactfully expose foolishness. they also can reveal another person's motives or intentions. And on occasion, they can even challenge or direct. Frequently, the real issue is not the substance of the situation. But catch me. You know what the real issue is? Most times when you have conflict, it's not the substance of the issue, it's how people feel. I'm telling you right now, most conflict comes back to somebody's feelings got hurt. But I've had people say, man, we've got major problems. Like things are really bad. Like everything's wrong. And it's actually really one thing. Pastor, a lot of people are saying it's actually one person. Usually. A lot of people are saying it's usually. What people? How many people? Well, I'm not sure. How many people have you heard from this particular issue? Well, just one. Okay? That's not many. That's one. There's a difference. Now, there might be many, but you only know of one. But what is the issue? But I'm telling you right now, I've done this long enough to realize that most problems come from somebody's feelings got hurt somewhere. And so questions help bring that out. And a well-worded question can restore confidence and maintain open communication without anybody getting offended. Having the right question for the right situation, you know what it is? It's an art. It is an art, and questions can be used to help in a variety of situations. The secret lies in the development of a few basic skills, and these skills are exemplified by Nehemiah. He exemplifies them very well. So he uses a why question. Let's go back to Nehemiah in chapter 2. All right, in verse 3, why should not my countenance be sad? He asks a why question to answer also a why question. The king asked him, why is thy countenance sad? Why should it not be sad? When you ask a why question, you are indicating an element of authority. However, Nehemiah prefaced his why question, which indicates authority, with submission. Let the king live forever. I submit to you, and I'm for you. But why should I not be sad? It's a calculated risk, but it shows urgency of the issue. Friends, in life, you're going to take calculated risks. Don't be foolish and do things right. If he just came back, why shouldn't I be sad? That would have been deadly in this scenario. That would have showed a lack of respect and a challenge to his authority. And if you want to get a superior to move on your behalf, you have to sympathize with their situation, and remember, you have to make sure that they feel no threat from you. Let the king live forever. Why should I not be sad? This question also probes for a convincing rationale for one's behavior or decision. He's saying, well, why shouldn't I be? And then he gives an explanation that, remember, culturally, all right, look at verse 3. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? And when you understand who you're talking to, okay, this is a part of his kingdom. He has a responsibility for it. But secondly, culturally, respect for your ancestors was of high importance in that culture. And to have ancestors' graves desecrated was unacceptable in that culture. And he says, why should I not be sad my father's sepulchres lie waste. And the king immediately knew, I'd be upset too. Because culturally, that was understandable explanation. And it moved the king to say, how can I help? And Nehemiah's ready. He said, welp. And he had his list ready to go. All right? But why questions? What questions, on the other hand? So why questions generally put the person being addressed on the defensive. So you got to be very careful with why questions. Nehemiah gets to use it because he deferred to the king and then he used a culturally acceptable explanation, and it was okay. But why questions in general are why are you doing that? Why did you do this? What were you hoping to accomplish when you did this? You see the difference? What were you hoping to accomplish? Now I'm trying to understand you. Why? I'm in trouble. What questions, on the other hand, generally ask for an opinion and necessitate the individual think through the issues and provide a logical answer? One of the things you have to understand from a leadership perspective is don't assume you have the whole story. Don't make your decision before you have all the facts. You're going to usually get part of the story. All right? You're going to get part of the story. One of the things that I'm working on my teens with is, and we had a great lesson last week, but one of the things we want to work on is telling the whole story, not part of it. Because when you only tell part of it, you're not presenting the facts as they are in totality. So parents, be wise and ask questions when you get a story. And, and again, part of the questions are know the kid. I remember a couple years ago when we were up at Victory, Titus came to us. And he said, how is school today? He goes, oh, it's awful. I'm like, really, why? He's like, I honestly, I don't feel safe there. Really, you don't feel safe? Well, what makes you not feel safe? Well, I got up to go use the bathroom, and the teacher told me no. And said I need to sit back down. And I feel like I should just be able to go where I want, when I want, and I just don't think it's safe for me to be stuck in that chair. I mean, I don't think it's fair that if I have to use the bathroom, I can't go. I said, well, did you ask the teacher if you could go to the bathroom? He said, no. So the teacher was in the middle of teaching, and you just got up to walk out, and the teacher told you to go sit back down, and that's why you don't feel safe. Am I understanding you properly? He goes, yeah, that's exactly right. I go, knock it off. Are you kidding me? You don't feel safe. Don't ever say that to me again because you couldn't go to the bathroom. You got to ask the teacher to get up. Like, that's common sense, son. All right? You can't what if every kid just got up and walked out and roamed around the school? Would that be safe? I mean, he got 15 kids just walking wherever they want, whenever they want. Is that safe? Well, we can't find 3 of them, but, And he's like, oh, well, I didn't think of it like that. I'm like, yeah, no, don't ever. So ask questions, all right? Now, the thing is this, is that, I know Titus, all right? And, it's like, is Sam in here or where's she at? What's that? She's teaching. That's right, she's downstairs, sorry. So, I mean, if Sam's like, I'm at the bank and, man, this guy was just a total jerk to me and go on and on. And part of me, not that I get into it because she's an adult, she can do it. But if I were going to really get to the root of the conflict, what did you do to him? I didn't do anything. I want the video. Because in my heart, I'm sure occasionally it's unprovoked because there are a few nutcases out there. And but in general, all right, if you're like I wanted to see your face beforehand. I want to see the whole thing because there's something there. Because I know her, all right? I know her. Susie, what do you think? You think I'm right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, know the person, all right? Ask questions. And that doesn't mean they're always at fault. Honestly, in life, problems usually are a two-way street. The Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. Now, what is it? What scenario do you have to make peace? You need what? Not peace. You need conflict. And a peacemaker comes into the situation and makes peace between parties. It could be themselves and somebody else, or it could be two people at odds with one another, and they're a third party coming in to make peace. All right? And so that is in either way. But that requires, you're only going to make peace with people if you can ask the right questions. What's going on? What has happened? How did you feel about that? All right? And so these are important things. All right, and we're going to move on to the next study, which is the rest of chapter 2. And let me grab my notes here. There we are. And so this study is entitled Taking Command, which is what Nehemiah is going to do in the latter part of chapter 2. So we're going to spend probably the next week. I'll be back with the teens, so Joe will be in here. But when I come back afterwards, we'll get more into this. We'll just kind of hit the beginning part of this. But let me paint a picture for you. All right. This is a new branch manager, and he replaces another manager who's retiring. And this manager who is retiring, was a good manager. People really liked him. So obviously, the guy coming in has a tough job already. Like if you have a boss that everybody likes and he leaves and the next guy comes in, that's not an easy job. And this guy coming into this position knew that a favorable reaction to his appointment was essential. He wanted a favorable reception, but he also understood, and he wasn't wrong, that he needed to assert his authority. So you have these two things. You want to be received well, but you have to convey your authority simultaneously. This is the challenge every leader has, and the newer you are to the position, the harder it is to get this, and the more critical it is that you get this balance. You have to be respected, but you want them to like you. And you got to have that balance. In your job, whether you're an entry level, you want people to respect you, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they are favorable to you as well. So this guy who's taking this job, he actually comes to the place 2 weeks prior before he starts his responsibilities, moves to the town, learns the area, kept himself in the background, studied the situation at the place that he was starting, and on his first day in the office, he schedules a meeting of all the department heads, and he praises each one of the men for the work that they have done, and he complimented them on their individual achievements. But then he deliberately changes his attitude and continues to say, but I don't care what you've done in the past. From now on, and he goes into it, of all the things that are going to be different. And the result of this assertiveness of his part is not hard to imagine. Morale took a nosedive, and instead of a smooth transition, the new manager created barriers that would take months to overcome. In all of this, it causes us to ask, is there a right way to take over a new position of leadership? Are there proven techniques that will help us get over these challenges? Because Nehemiah is about to transition now. He's finally got the green light to go. Hurdle 1 has been accomplished. But now he's got to go there and rally a bunch of people that are morally, the morale is gone. There's no morale. There's no motivation. There's nobody there that wants to do anything. Hence the condition of the city. So he's got to take over a situation that's not good. So how does he do that effectively to motivate the people to want to work? It's one thing to get to the position. It's another thing to motivate other people to want to do right. Nehemiah, we've spent weeks just for him to get approval and to put himself in a position to do well. But now he's got to change gears. It's not about getting the king's approval. It's not about getting the materials or the permission. It's about motivating people now, which is completely different than what he's done before. And so are there proper techniques on motivating people in a biblical manner? And the dynamics involved in chapter 2, the dynamics involved in this situation are illustrated here in Nehemiah chapter 2. And these dynamics have both internal and external focuses. So Nehemiah, as we remember, formerly was the king's cupbearer. And in this position, in a sense, he was under the watchful eye of a superior. In other words, his superior, the king, noticed, what's wrong with you? You're not acting right. You think the king was watching him if he noticed that he was having a bad day? Yeah, he was under constant supervision. But now, basically, Nehemiah has become a governor. How much supervision does a governor have? Not as much. He went from being under the watchful eye of a superior daily to now being removed from any direct supervision. He's on his own. And he is facing a situation in which many men fail. Because some of us, when we don't have somebody watching over us to motivate us, lose our motivation. You got to be self-driven if you want to be a leader. Young people, if the only motivation to get your work done is a detention, that's not leadership. Not one bit. If the only motivation to work hard at your job, and this goes for the teenager to the adult, is the supervisor watching over you and making sure and checking up on you that you do your job, that's fine, but that's not leadership. And you're never going to go far with that mentality. I mean, think about Lifeline Baptist Church. Who's watching what I do as far as my daily schedule? Is there anybody watching over what I do day to day? No. Would that make the position then easy to be lazy? Yeah. I think one of the average pastor's biggest problem is they are masters at presenting themselves as busy, but they actually don't do a lot. That's an opinion based on personal experience. But when you are independent in that type of role, you got to understand that the motivation for what you do has got to come from within, with your relationship to God, all right? Self-driven. And a lot of people fail at that. But we also see the strategy which he employed as he took over his new assignment contains some important principles for us today. And these principles can be applied to any external situation that we may face. And as we see this situation, it involved challenging, motivating, and encouraging those in Jerusalem. He had to do all of them. Challenge them, motivate them, and encourage them. And after discussing those external forces Nehemiah faced, he assumed leadership in Judah. And at that point, so basically there was a lot of external forces that he had to assume, he had to work through. Once he got those done, then his leadership role changes again to internal dynamics, which may have affected his leadership. Because, all right, so what's he trying to do? Why is he there? What was the purpose? Who can tell me? Why was Nehemiah going to Jerusalem? What was he going to do? Rebuild the city. Right. He did that in 50-something days. I think it was 52. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's around 50, 52 days. He was there for 12 years. Do you think once the building project was done and the people didn't have anything more to build, do you think the dynamics changed? They did. As we'll see, the people did the work, but they were far from God. They needed personal revival. And when that began to happen, Nehemiah got the right people in the right place and then took a step back because he wasn't a priest. He was a governmental leader who obviously had faith in God, but he wasn't a priest of God. He wasn't a preacher per se, and he let the priesthood handle the revival. And then when people were right with God, then he steps back in and starts doing this. So there's some changes there. So let's let's pick up in Nehemiah 2. Who'd read verse 9 for me? Nehemiah 2, who'd like to read? Hunter, go ahead, verse 9.
Then I came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me.
All right, so in verse 9, we see the journey to Judah, okay? And so when Nehemiah traveled to Jerusalem, all right, he was accompanied by a band of soldiers. They ensured his protection. They also added to his prestige. Who's this guy showing up with a bunch of soldiers? This must be somebody. All right, this wasn't some guy just coming in on horseback to Jerusalem by himself. No, he's coming with soldiers from Babylon. This is an important individual. Whoever, they don't know who he is. Whoever this is, this guy's important. And as he presented his royal credentials to border officials, every check mark, somebody importance comes through. This is from the king. This guy's important. Now, word would have traveled slower than today because there was no internet, but word still travels. This trip would have taken him about 2 months. Now, we see that the enemies of the Jews in Samaria soon learned of Nehemiah's arrival. Someone who wants to read verse 10 for me. Go ahead.
When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel.
So, I found this interesting. How did Nehemiah know they were upset? You ever think about that? Because here we see Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite heard of it. It grieved them exceedingly. Well, how did he know that they were upset? You can't prove it one way or another, but if I had a bunch of soldiers with me and I perceived that there was going to be adversity, because there was adversity before, that they got the building program shut down in Ezra chapter number 4. So that means that there are enemies in the land that are going to oppose themselves. I probably would have read up on where that opposition came from, and I probably would have sent some of my soldiers, hey, go to these towns and just listen and report back what you hear. I want to know what I'm dealing with. I would have done that. I would have sent people in undercover, listen, just, go wherever people are at and just listen. Is it possible that that's what happened? We don't know, but what we do know is every time these people in another town are responding negatively, Nehemiah knows about it. It occurs all throughout chapter 4. He knows exactly what's going on in these other towns. And so The only explanation is that he sent, and it was Samaria. Samaria is far to the north. He sent personnel to Samaria to keep him informed. And it shows that Nehemiah was a realist. In Matthew 10, verse 16, he says, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." You know, God wants us to think and be smart, know who you're dealing with, and make wise choices. So Nehemiah is not naive. He didn't trust those who had a history of opposing the welfare of Judah. He trusted the Lord, but he also took adequate precautions, and this is a great example of that. Now, real quick, in closing today, the leader of the opposition to Nehemiah was a guy by the name of Sanballat. He is the governor of Samaria. He's called the Horonite, and it means he was probably one of the what were called Beth Horon people mentioned in Joshua, which their god was the god Haran. And he would have been a descendant of a mixed group of people that settled in Samaria after the Assyrians' conquest in 2 Kings. So his associate is an Ammonite by the name of Tobiah. Tobiah was from an old and famous family who had ruled Ammon for generations. And in verse 19, there's another guy by the name of Geshem, and he would have been a powerful emir who had recently united the Arabs in the vast confederacy had a vast confederacy of Arab people. And so they were on the south side of the Dead Sea. And so these were some formidable people that were opposed to him. So that's where we're going to leave off now, and we'll get back to this in a couple weeks. Father, thank you for the study. Bless the service to follow. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.